All right, hello everybody, and good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining us for our town hall with Anne Weston. My name is Chris Hume. I'm the managing editor at the Lancaster Patriot, a local newspaper serving Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and beyond. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank FreePA for hosting the space and inviting us to moderate this town hall. And I want to thank Anne for joining us. Anne is running for state representative in District 100 here in southern Lancaster County and is here tonight to answer your questions, from voters, as she will be on the ballot on May 17th against Brian Cutler. Brian Cutler was invited to attend, but unfortunately could not make it tonight. But we have Anne here, and welcome, Anne. Thanks for joining us. So, a couple house rules here. We have a microphone over here. If you have a question that you'd like to ask Anne, we can form a line there. Maybe when we get 2 or 3 people, just wait till that goes down. If you're over there and I see you over there, then I will be sure to give you an opportunity to ask your question. We also have cards on that back table, I believe, and if you want to write your question, if you'd prefer not to be filmed, you can put the cards are there, and then we have a basket over here that you can put your card in the basket, and we will try to answer that as well. We are being streamed right now on Facebook, so if you want to share that stream, you can go to the Lancaster Patriot Facebook page and share that, and more people can have the opportunity to hear Anne answer these questions. So, if you do have a question, try to keep it concise. Try to focus on policy issues and positions, and make sure they're questions too. And I think we'll have a good night. So without further ado, let's begin. I'm going to start off with some questions. Once you guys are warmed up and have some, feel free to form a line or put a question in there. We also have, if people are watching online, if you're watching online and you have a question that you would like to ask Anne, go ahead and put it in the comments section on our Facebook page right under this video, and we will try to address it. So, Anne, I want to start us off with a question about life and about abortion. So the Daily Wire reports that there is a bill in Louisiana, the Abolition of Abortion in Louisiana Act of 2022, sponsored by Republican Representative Danny McCormick. And this bill would acknowledge the sanctity of innocent human life created in the image of God, which should be equally protected from fertilization to natural death, to ensure the right to life and equal protection of the laws for all preborn babies. It applies statutes against homicide to children in the womb. So this bill in Louisiana would not make exceptions for cases of rape, incest, or the health of the mother. Now, it still hasn't passed, so there could be changes theoretically to the bill, and this bill is also, irregardless of Roe versus Wade, what happens with that, the legislators want to pass this bill. So my question for you to start us off is, would you fight for, support, and vote for a bill which would do the same thing here in Pennsylvania to outlaw all abortion, no exceptions, and treat abortion as homicide under the law?
That's a very interesting question because it certainly hits right to the core of what a lot of people believe. And I think I have a problem with saying that it's murder if the choice is the mother's life, because she may already have children, and we hope that perhaps she has a husband or a partner who she's helping to support. And sometimes these decisions, you can't find a decision that has no cost. So are you going to put her in jail? Are you going to put her husband in jail? I mean, how are you going to deal with that if you're going to prosecute her? And so I think, but obviously that's an extreme case, and in this world of modern medicine, there should be certainly ways that they can help the baby come to a point where it can be born early and taken care of. I mean, my nephew was born 4 months premature. He was tiny. He survived. He's doing fabulously. He, to my knowledge, has absolutely none of the issues that preemies sometimes can have. So modern medicine is amazing, and we should use that to the full. I think the other issue is how people get pregnant in the first place and don't want their babies. I mean, that is a serious consideration that affects all parts of society, and to sideline it and not take it seriously, which is sometimes how people could interpret it if you're going to say that all life is sacred and you're going to prosecute if it's ever eliminated. A lot of people are going to have problems with that. So even if you might be on a correct footing from a moral basis, can you institute that law without creating a lot of upheaval in society? I think we need to take those considerations seriously. So I would like to say that all life is sacred. Well, I do say that all life is sacred, but I'd like to say that we would never have abortions, but I'm not sure if it's realistic, especially given the health of the mother. So
just to be clear, this is a bill that is in the state of Louisiana. There are, it's been passed through committee. It's written. Obviously, it could be changed, but if that law was before you, if you were a state legislator here in Pennsylvania and this law was before you, would you vote for it? Would you vote yes for a law that would criminalize abortion, all abortions? Or would you vote no on that and prefer another type of legislation?
I would like to vote yes on it, but I would need to see what the details were in the law.
Okay. Just one clarifying question on that. So what would you, if that law, if you need to clarify, what do you see as the solution to abortion in Pennsylvania? How will you defend life if this law perhaps isn't the way that you would like to see it done? How would you defend the unborn in Pennsylvania?
So I'm not sure if this is a good parallel, but I'm thinking about how in earlier decades there was a lot of emphasis of being tough on crime.
Okay.
So there were mandatory sentences, and then that seemed to create problems, so then society backtracked on that. And my thought is, if you're going to be tough on crime, it means you need to be tough on all the causes of crime as well. You cannot take it as an isolated issue. So if you want to be tough on abortion, then you need to be tough on all the reasons that people ever get pregnant and wish they hadn't. And you also need to have a safety net for all the mothers who are confused, who are worried, who may be kicked out of their homes. I realize that nowadays that might not happen as much as it did in the past, where there were more strict moral situations where parents actually did kick their daughters out of the home when they were pregnant. But what are the safety nets for all these women who have babies who they maybe really don't want, or maybe are not geared to taking care of? Are there enough people out there who want that bill to go through who will also say, I will adopt one of these children? It's very easy to lower the boom on people who've gotten in trouble and then distance yourself from the cost associated with that.
Okay, so just want to be clear, if your view on abortion, though, should it be criminalized, and is it the taking of a human life?
It is a taking of a human life. There's no question about that.
Okay, and should it be criminalized?
I would say that it should be criminalized in almost every case, and I would need to see really good proof that the mother's life was in danger.
Okay.
And couldn't be saved by any modern medicine.
Okay. I think we have a question. All right. What is your position on the Convention of the States?
So I've been asked that before, and I think that the motivation for it is very good. For example, term limits, balanced budget, these things are extremely important. However, my problem with Convention of the States is, to me, this is another top-down solution. And I am not convinced that top-down solutions work. I mean, that's one of the reasons that people are frustrated with modern government, is that it's constantly top-down. There's not enough coming up from the grassroots. There's not enough communities solving their own problems. So if there is a rule, or a law, or whatever it might be, that comes down from the national level, which is wrong, why is there no pushback? Why do we have to wait for Convention of States to have that kind of a pushback? And then there are also issues of how do you know who's going to be sent as a delegate? How do you control it? I know the Convention of States Action website has a lot of information on that, and they are quite convinced that nothing can go wrong with it. But I have my reservations, and I kind of feel like it's a very complicated solution for a problem which could be solved otherwise. I would like to see our legislators first resist some of these unwarranted rules that come down, or make a stronger effort for a balanced budget.
Okay. You mentioned the idea of these federal mandates or regulations coming down, and it seemed you suggest why should the states follow those? And it brings up the idea of nullification, that if the federal government tries to enforce something that the state says, this is unconstitutional or immoral. I mean, the example of Roe versus Wade is just one of those examples. Is there any other example that you have of where the state of Pennsylvania should stand up against federal mandates and say, whatever federal law, federal mandates that the representatives of the people in Pennsylvania say the federal government does not have authority to force this on the state, and that you would nullify or ignore one of those federal regulations?
Well, vaccine mandates for sure.
Okay.
It is your body to do what you want with. And I know probably people will say, well, what about the unborn child in the womb? That's not your body. Your body is the mother carrying the baby. The baby has a different body. So just to go back to the abortion topic. But the vaccine mandates are definitely one, probably firearms laws as well. I'm sure there are a whole lot of laws where we have just gotten in the habit of accepting top-down decisions. And I think that we need to put on the brakes and start resisting that. And you don't need a convention of states to start at least talking about it in the communities. I mean, for example, I've heard of communities who gave back the COVID money that was given to them because along with the money came stipulations, now you're going to have to submit to whatever government regulations come with future pandemics. Well, you have no idea what you're agreeing to. So I think that also brings up a good point, which is don't think that there's a solution without a cost. There is a cost to every single solution. So what cost are you going to be willing to pay? And maybe the cost that a lot of us should start to be willing to pay is to say no to money, because money seems to be driving everything.
I want to remind everybody, if you have a question, feel free to hop in line over there or write it and place it in the basket over there. Speaking of money coming from federal government and also state government and taxation, let's talk about education. Obviously a big topic. I'm sure people have questions about that. Got a few questions on it, but let's just start with, in general, as you look at education in Pennsylvania, where do you see the problems are, and what do you see the solutions to those problems? And then, I can ask a follow-up question to that.
I would say the two that immediately come to mind, not having had children and not having had any in school, of course, if I didn't have them, and also having started out as a public school teacher. One is this issue of we need more money, constantly we need more money. And I guess I question that, because when I was teaching, I didn't have a huge budget. I had a computer to help do my grades. I had an overhead projector. Sometimes I took a TV from the library to show a video. And I needed a copy machine. Granted, an English teacher has fewer expenses perhaps than a science teacher who wants to do labs. But you do not need a lot of money to educate people well. Look at Abraham Lincoln. So I think this idea that you always need more money and that your budget should always grow needs to be soundly rejected. That's a good start. And then the next issue would be the parents having control over the curriculum. And at a very minimum, being able to read the texts that their children have these texts not just online or available at the schools for 3 months before they're approved, but indefinitely and forever. For example, a friend of ours recently had a situation in a northern Lancaster County school district where her daughter came home and she asked, "Mommy, is it okay for boys to get married? Can boys kiss each other?" And she's only 6. And her mother was shocked and investigated, and it turns out that this little girl has access to an app during school time, which parents do not have access to because the license is owned by the school. And it is shut down at 3 o'clock each afternoon. So by the time the child gets home, the parent cannot access whatever information is there. Unless perhaps the child would be homesick during that time, maybe they could. And this curriculum was approved by the IT department. To me, I don't even know how something like this happens. I can't imagine that this would have happened back when I was teaching, although perhaps it would have. But parents need to have complete control over knowing what is in the curriculum and should be able to petition the school to remove any of that, and permanently.
So what would be, I want to ask a follow-up question on education from some of those parents who have opted out of the government school system. But for those who are in there with their kids and they're asking, okay, we agree that's a problem, what's the solution? What, if any, solution do you see could be done at the level of state representative for the problems in government school?
Well, for sure you should have a parent committee that approves all the curriculum. It cannot be approved simply by the school board or the teachers.
Okay.
There's no question about that. And then, did you want me to?
Well, I just didn't know if you think there's a law that needs to be passed, if what could be done to bring about change in the government school system. If people are asking, hey, we need to change this, how can that happen? I understand that you want the parents to have more control, but what will lead to that? Is it law? Is it legislation? What do you think is a solution to that?
Well, unfortunately, I think I would like to avoid laws whenever possible because I think we have too many of them. However, in these cases, you do need laws, just like you need regulation with certain types of environmental pollution. Because apparently, even though the parents have been pushing back, they haven't been treated with respect. And it appears that a law is necessary.
Okay, I want to ask you a follow-up then on the fact that we have so many laws, still staying with education, and many parents, even before everything that's happened in the past 2 years, have realized that the government education system is not the solution for their children. Many parents have chosen homeschooling, private schools, other options. And we look around and we see some of those things you mentioned in the school. We see critical race theory. We see teaching about homosexuality being normalized, transgenderism, abortion, atheism. We see these things in the government school system, even here in Lancaster County, and the list goes on with the problems there. I think everybody's aware of the issues in the school system. So with that being the case, the state of Pennsylvania still requires parents who are not sending their children to the government school system to adhere to the government's regulations about educating their children. Whether it's homeschooling or whatever the government says, you have to tell us what you're doing, you have to teach these subjects, you have to answer to us for how you educate your kids. And there was a case that the Amish won in the Supreme Court back in the 1970s where they said that those compulsory attendance laws and the government being involved were unconstitutional as applied to the Amish because it violated their First Amendment right to the free exercise of religion. And what they saw, I want to give my child an education that I see is fit, honors God, and is going to help them. So my question is this: will you support a bill that applies the same logic to other parents who may not be Amish, to any parent who wants to educate their child as they see fit, without the government sticking its nose in that parent's business? So would you support a bill that removes all those regulations from the state of Pennsylvania saying if you're going to homeschool your child, you have to tell us, you have to follow these steps, you have to teach all these subjects, you have to create a portfolio, you have to take tests? And many parents are saying, why is the government the one that is the master of education when we look at the government school system and we see all this happening? So would you support a bill that removes all those regulations and allows parents to truly have freedom in educating their children?
Yes, I would. And I can imagine that the pushback would be, well, what if the parents are teaching their children racism? Well, I would say, what if the public schools are teaching the children racism? I think the left has lost the ability to make any kind of a moral, take the moral high ground there in terms of values teaching. And if anyone would worry that the parents aren't going to teach their children appropriately to get ahead in this world and be marketable, I think I'd like to see the evidence proving that. I would say from what I have seen, homeschooled kids are some of the very best educated that there are, and broadly educated as well.
We have a question now that came in either online or in the basket there, and the question is this: what are some of the reasons why you would be a better representative for District 100 than Brian Cutler? All right, and so as we consider, Representative Cutler is the incumbent, people are asking, okay, why should I vote for someone new who hasn't been in there? So how would you answer that? Why should people vote for you instead of Representative Cutler?
Okay, well, I would say if the first question, if the first consideration is why should you vote for someone new, I would say then if that's a problem, why are you living in America? I mean, we're always going to hopefully have new people running through. This is what makes America strong. My personal view is that we should be having a very routine rotation of new people through, coming from all walks of life, all education backgrounds. And while I happen to have a college degree and 2 masters, I would be happy to vote for someone who only had high school if I was convinced of their integrity, their willingness to be open to the different people that are going to have to represent, their ability to combine multiple viewpoints. And so what I bring to this race is the fact that I do have this broader education. I have my BA in Literature and Philosophy. I have a Master's of Arts and Teaching. I have the Executive MBA from University of Pittsburgh. And I've lived overseas for 12 years in a post-communist country, so I know very well how Marxism does not work and how it ruins the culture and how it can infiltrate. I worked as a public school teacher. I worked night shift at the post office. I worked in corporate language training. I worked in global IT service coordination and developing a global IT system for a company which was a lot of individual offices that had their own private or individual IT setups. I was a financial planner in Czech, in a foreign country. I started an import business. So I've done corporate language training after I came back to the States. I did this online. So I have a lot of life experience, global experience, business experience. I have worked at coordinating groups of people and coordinating processes. And I would say that that is pretty helpful when you have a district that has many different interests. You have farmers, you have construction, you have different types of factories, you have parents with school issues, you have elderly, you have people who maybe are having a hard time finding a job. You must be able to coordinate multiple types of interests.
Okay, now what about Representative Cutler's voting record or positions? Is there something, a way that you would be a better representative because of the way that he has voted that you believe is not in the best interest of Lancaster County and the state of Pennsylvania, that you would vote in a different way?
So I would have been pushing through constitutional carry much sooner. I would definitely not have voted to fund University of Pittsburgh. You can say what you want about the money not going to fetal research, but money is money. It goes wherever it needs to go, and if you're keeping the lights on, you're funding the research indirectly. Act 77, that's a large topic, but that was a disaster. And I guess my problem is that I see a lack of involving the constituents. To me, your job as a representative is to make the maximum amount of information available to your constituents, to involve their input, to, whether it's having focus groups, town halls, you name it, you need to have people giving you insight, sharing it with one another, and you need to make it really easy for them to know what's going on. It should not be hard to figure out what the law was, what's in the law, how it was voted on, and you shouldn't, well, I'm using past tense, but you should know these things before the laws are voted on so that you can give input. I feel like most of what we know, we find out after the fact.
Let's talk about taxation. Actually, we have a question. Go ahead, sir.
I have multiple questions.
Let's start with one. Yeah, we'll do one at a time.
And I think they'll be easy, I hope. Do you believe in term limits?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I will say the problem, though, is that who is responsible for voting in the term limits? It's the people who are already in. So if you say you're interested in term limits and you don't step down, you're clearly not interested in term limits, whether they are a law or not.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm here. I just think our politicians get in and stay in, and things change. They're not for us anymore. Question number 2. I called the office of my current 100th district representative And I had a problem, well, I called him a couple times, but the one problem I called him on was the election. I said my vote, I don't believe my vote counted. I feel for the first time in my entire life like something wasn't right. And I don't know what you think about that, but all I got was a runaround. And so I'd like to hear what you thought or think about what happened, or do you value the votes of the people? Because I'm not sure. And I'm not just Brian, I think it's the whole state and multiple states, but that's important to me. It's what makes America great. So
You're asking about election integrity?
you can put it that simple. That's why, it's one of the reasons I'm here. There's one more and then I'll go, but you can answer that.
So, yes, Act 77 was a disaster. And I really have a problem with anybody who says that it wasn't. And I am not going to talk about a fraud because I do believe there was fraud, but it's a very complex issue. There are a lot of numbers involved. I think, I have a couple links to places on my website. If you want to go investigate it more yourself, you can go to these sites and see what they have to say and make your own assessment. My contention with Act 77 has always been purely from an organizational and paperwork standpoint. So we go from 0, except for absentee ballot, 0 mail-in ballots, to 50 days of mail-in balloting, which is the longest in the nation. And these ballots start to be counted on election day. They're not counted ahead of time, as apparently they are in Florida. This is why we didn't have to wait for the results from Florida, because they were already being counted. And we're supposed to believe that we are able to make this radical of a change without any, a dry run. And then we're also supposed to make this radical of change in a political climate which is volatile and highly charged. Ever since Trump entered the Oval Office, people were trying to destroy him. So there was all kinds of tension. And we're going to radically change our election process with no dry run in that climate and think that everything's going to be fine. That is naive in the extreme. And let me give you a contrasting example. So when I worked for the consulting company where I did the the global IT process management, we had a situation where we have these consultants coming from all over the world. They're going to Africa to do whatever study they're doing, and they may be coming from France and Germany. And if they have their French and German phones, they're going to be paying roaming fees. So we needed to give them a loaner phone with a SIM from whatever country they were going to. Well, Africa is a different culture than Asia, South America, Europe. We had to figure out what process are we going to use so that the phone doesn't get lost in the mail, it doesn't get stolen, it arrives in good condition, the consultant can hit the ground running. In order to do that, we first of all investigated what is the culture, what's the situation with the mail, you name all the details. We did a dry run with a phone that was just empty. Then we did a run with one consultant to make sure that it worked. And we built our process for each different continent based on that. Now, that's typical in business. I don't know what corporation out there would have instituted such radical changes we had with Act 77 without doing some kind of more preparation. And then you have the whole issue of whether it's constitutional. And I would like to read to you, this is really important, maybe regarding dry runs, if you go to my website, and I have a link there where you can see how Governor Wolf described these changes. And part of his writing there says that the changes do not impact the November 5, 2019 election. So if this is such a wonderful change, why didn't they just get started right away? Now, someone might say, well, they didn't have time to print the mail-in ballots, but I think it's a little bit crazy to think that we're going to do our dry run in the presidential election in the most powerful country in the world. So the Senate memorandum that talk about why they wanted to change the law. It says here that Pennsylvania's current constitution restricts voters wanting to vote by absentee ballot to situations where XYZ. We propose to amend the Constitution to eliminate these limitations, etc. And then another reason to make these voting changes, Pennsylvania's Constitution excludes federal, state, county, and municipal employees from serving as poll workers. Given the challenges election officials have in finding volunteers, this provision is an additional and unnecessary headache. We propose to address these problems by repealing this provision of the Pennsylvania Constitution. Now, those are some pretty serious changes, and I'm pretty sure you can figure out why the different government workers aren't allowed to take part. How did we know anything about this? I mean, do you remember town halls? Do you remember it being publicized? Do you remember knowing anything about it until COVID came, and then the way the media portrayed it, it was because of COVID that we had mail-in balloting? My question is, if this is so wonderful, why were we not involved? Was it done somehow in secret? I mean, obviously it's not entirely in secret. They can't do that very effectively. But where was the community input? We've been doing it a certain way since 1937, and now we're going to change it with not involving us? That doesn't make any sense.
All right, and you had one more
One
question?
more, thank you, one more. I have in my family a wife and 2 daughters that both work in healthcare. And I heard you mention the word mandate, and being that they were in healthcare, they were mandated to take an experimental vaccine. And I guess my question is not just on the mandates. I don't know how to ask this maybe properly, but it is bothering me that after all the research I've done on something called informed consent, which is law, if I'm right, it's our laws that we have informed consent. How is my tax dollars right now going on TV ads by the state of Pennsylvania saying that this experimental vaccine is safer than the drugs I get on the shelf in the store? And I don't, first of all, I know that that's not a fact. I believe that with everything I've read about it. But how can the state take my money and actually lie to me? That's what I feel is happening. And what's your thought on that?
I would ask why there isn't more transparency in how our tax money is spent. I mean, I know I'm going to be told by somebody who has more knowledge than me that it's too complex, but I'm sorry, I have a hard time believing that. I mean, there are a lot of smart people in District 100. There are a lot of people with a lot of financial background, and I do believe that we deserve much more information on how our money is spent and to be able to put restrictions on that in some way. We should be able to vote for certain things, whether we think that it's worthwhile or not. I'm frustrated by receiving newsletters which talk about all these new bills that have been developed, and isn't this wonderful? And I know that nobody works for free there in Harrisburg. So to make this bill, you had to pay someone to put it together. And what if the bill goes nowhere? What if it dies in committee? What if it gets tabled? What if it's eyewash? What if they make bills just to make you feel that something is happening, but nothing is going anywhere? And then what if they make bills that actually cost a lot of money, such as this? I don't know where the funding came from, but how is it that we don't know that? And I will say, regarding newsletters from last year, we were told constantly in every newsletter, the vaccine is safe and effective. And my question was, you're not a lawyer, or sorry, you're not a doctor, and you're not a scientist. You don't have the authority to tell me that it is safe and effective. And it is clearly still in the experimental stages. And my question was constantly, why are you, Mr. Cutler, not standing up and speaking this truth to us? And why are some of my friends getting fired from their jobs? They are perfectly healthy. They worked for a year as a hero, and now suddenly they're no good. And other of my friends, very much against their will, in tears, because They had no choice, they felt, except to get vaccinated with something they were terrified of because they had read the reports of all the adverse effects and death, or lose their jobs and not be able to support their families, have nothing left for retirement. That's criminal, to just sit back and let it happen. And I do not believe that we couldn't do anything simply because it came from on high, from the federal government. I don't believe for a moment. If our morality is that fragile, then what's the point in continuing to live? We're here to fight for one another, not sit back and just take things because somebody in power said that it had to be a certain way.
We have another question over here.
Sure, I'm a friend of Anne's family. I'm originally from Lancaster County, practicing medicine in the district area and in Virginia. For the past many years, I've seen the opioid crisis get worse and worse and worse. Part one of my question is, should the state of Pennsylvania continue to monitor physician prescribing as a means of remedying the opioid crisis?
Yes, I would definitely say so, because my understanding is that part of what drove physician prescriptions was, I don't know if there were lawsuits involved, but certainly there were satisfaction surveys at hospitals, asking the patient, are you satisfied with the care you received? How's your pain? Is it being managed properly? And everybody has a different body chemistry. Some people don't react well to these drugs at all. Others immediately become addicted. But this fixation on customer satisfaction to the exclusion of what is actually safe for the customer or the patient is a problem.
The second related part of this, and Stanley, I thought you both were doing quite well tonight. Should the state of Pennsylvania mandate that prescribing be all electronic, in addition, that all medical records be electronic?
I don't feel that I have enough information to answer that well. I will say the thoughts that go through my head are that having electronic records can be very convenient. For example, my mother, we were on vacation and she had a crisis related to her cancer, and we were able to go to the local hospital, and they were able to have somebody read her scans and compare them from another country. I mean, it was amazing how just using the global process that we were able to get an answer very quickly thanks to electronic records. On the other hand, when it's electronic, it's that much harder to keep safe and private. And I think that that is a serious issue.
Just as a brief response, I think your answer was very good. In Maryland, the state monitors all doctors' prescribing. The DEA monitors all doctors' prescribing. All insurance agencies monitor all doctors' prescribing. It doesn't seem to be doing us a lot of good. Our thought has been to bring people through schools of medicine, which should be freestanding, not run by the state, who are very, very good to begin with, who don't overprescribe. That's the real answer to that, I think.
Thank you very much for that. We'll go over there in one moment. I just want to follow up on drug use and drug abuse. And what would you say to someone who says the government should not be regulating whether or not someone consumes a substance that may very well harm them, but people should have that freedom to choose for themselves, because the government has often got it wrong when telling people what they can and can't consume, or telling them what they should or shouldn't. So why not let the people determine whether or not they're going to take a substance, whether it's a drug or not, and just criminalize if they act out on that? So, you've mentioned before you support, crime laws against drugs, but how would you respond to someone who says, well, why should the government be telling us what we can and can't consume?
Well, I guess I would say, is there a compelling state interest in regulating or criminalizing something, for example, like cocaine? The consequences of crime associated with being high, or I guess that's the state that you're in when you're on cocaine, can be severe. Now, I've been asked before about whether I support legalizing marijuana. And, to me, that seems like a different substance. I don't think, and I want to emphasize that just because something is legal does not make it safe. I am in no way saying that I advocate for anybody to be using marijuana. I personally can't imagine why I would ever, smoke it, eat it. I don't even know how people consume it. But I do know that some people seem to be very helped by it, who have certain types of medical conditions. And I'm not going to criticize that because, as I said before, people's body chemistries are different. People react differently to different substances. What works for one person may not work for another. One person who had spoken to me also asked about whether I would be in favor of him growing it in his own garden for his own personal use. And to me, it seems like you have a vested interest in the quality of the soil and the water and so on, and you would certainly be growing something that you considered to be healthy for you. I would say that it should be regulated the same, or the consequences of using it should be regulated as with alcohol. You shouldn't be driving under the influence. You're responsible for what you do when you're under the influence. You need to be careful. The brain is a malleable organ, well past the age of 18. So the idea that now that you're 18, because it's also, you can go to war, that therefore you should be able to smoke pot. Your brain is still developing, so I'm not sure that pot is really what you want to be putting in your brain at that point.
Yeah, and I think, to follow up on that, the issue that some people have is the government's gotten it wrong quite a few times before, and they've tried things like prohibition and really caused a lot of problems. So no one's questioning that people can abuse substances. It's just the question of, do drug laws help? Do they reduce crime? Some people would say drug laws only make things worse. So do you believe we need more drug laws, firmer drug laws, or do you think that's not solving the problem?
Maybe the answer is to look at other places, whether they are states or other countries where they perhaps maybe have more lenient laws. I have not investigated what the current state of Colorado is, but they certainly have more lenient laws than Pennsylvania. Has Colorado benefited in terms of jobs, education, and not just reduction of crime? Has legalizing pot there made it a much better state where everyone wants to come live there and they have lower medical costs and so on?
I have a question over here.
Thank you, and thank you, Anne, for coming by tonight, and thank you to the Lancaster Patriot for sponsoring this, what do you call it, semi-debate, half debate, since Brian Cutler didn't show up here tonight. Appreciate, Chris, what you said about the 18th and 21st Amendment being prohibition, and we're against prohibition. In other words, every one of us brings a moral compass even to the Constitution. We ultimately don't say, well, the Constitution says, because we get in arguments about the Constitution all the time. For example, our Second Amendment rights are stated even stronger than the Constitution in our Pennsylvania Constitution. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be questioned, and yet I need a license. So somebody decided that it's constitutional for me to have to ask permission. That was their moral framework. My question to you, Anne, is this. What is your moral framework? What ultimate moral standard do you bring to this office through which you will judge any bill or any type of amendment that comes before you? What is your standard?
That's a good question. So I was raised a Christian, and I am absolutely a Bible-believing Christian. I can't even imagine not having, I can't imagine not having been raised that way and not believing it fully with my whole being. And from what I read in the Bible, you're responsible for all your choices, and you're responsible for the effects of them. And I think that the gist of laws should be, how do we maximize freedom for people and also keep them accountable. And that would maybe go a little bit to, if I interpreted you correctly, the implication that we should try to not criminalize or make laws about certain aspects of life, but we should then have strict consequences when people use that freedom wrongly. So that would be one item. And then I would say the parallel part would be, you can't look at items in a vacuum. We are a community, we are families, we affect one another. So, and this would go back to my comment way at the beginning about the idea of being tough on crime. If you want to be tough on crime, you need to be tough on all the aspects that add to crime. So is it impossible for people to get jobs which really make them happy? And I'm not using that as an excuse for committing a crime. But I'm just using it as an example of something that is near and dear to everyone's heart, because we are made to work, and we should be doing work which makes us fulfilled and happy. So I would try as much as possible to approach any law from the concept of how does this work into the larger frame of life? And are we taking into account all the aspects that we need to when we make this law? That being said, my goal would definitely be to have fewer laws, because I think that one of the big problems is that we try to replace morality with regulation. And the more regulation you have, the more likely it is that you're going to inadvertently break a law, or that you're just going to want to break a law because you're overwhelmed and crushed by too many regulations and laws. And I saw that overseas. It was Czechs joked that it was a national sport to defy the law, because there were so many irrational laws, because they didn't have the morality, because they had had atheism for several generations. And so it was as if they needed the laws and social pressure in order to behave the way that they would have done if they had had more spiritual training.
Thank you for that answer. Just a quick follow-up. It's always, and I ask this as a pastor in Lancaster County. It's said that you can't legislate morality. I just want your reaction to this. It's not a long question. But is it true? What is your thoughts on this statement? That all laws are the passage of somebody's morality. What do you think about that statement?
Yes, I would say that's true, because it's an issue of right versus wrong. You're trying to correct some problem that you think is so much of a problem that it needs to be regulated. The Ten Commandments, that's legislating morality.
All right, we got another question over here.
I've seen out of the vote PA, so on, the canvassing done, there was way more fraud than that definitely changed the election. And here in Pennsylvania was one of the worst in the states. And I am very angry at Brian Cutler for not addressing it and not even seeming to be interested in looking at the evidence. I'm curious about your stand.
Well, I definitely believe there was fraud. And, you know, as I said before, I'm not going to say anything about specific amounts, because, you know, that's always up for debate. And if I would even mention a number, somebody would rush in with a fact check. But there's no question that there was fraud. And it's very logical when you think about how you can fill out a mail-in ballot request, and you put the information there, and then you can put where you want this mailed to. So there is a spot where you could put in your last four of your social or your driver's license number, but there's a box where you don't need to put that if you don't have that. So it means I could fill out a mail-in ballot for any of you and have it mailed to me. And, you know, maybe I'd get caught or maybe I wouldn't. And when you don't count any of the ballots until Election Day, so people are coming to the polls, they're giving their vote, and now you very clearly know, especially when you have 2.6 million mail-in ballots coming in like we had with this 2020 election, you very clearly know how much fraud you need to commit if you want to commit fraud. So I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I mean, I definitely believe there was fraud. To what degree? I don't know. I'll leave that to the experts. What should the result be? Well, clearly Act 77 should be repealed. And I would go so far as to say that the 2020 election is void. And will that create upheaval? Would it create upheaval if Biden was replaced with Trump? Absolutely. You know what? Sometimes it creates upheaval, to tell the truth.
All right, thank you for your question. We still have time for a few more. Sir, do you have a question? Yeah, I have several. All right, let's start with one, because we do have some questions here.
Thanks for coming out, Ann. I have a question on police seizing assets, asset forfeitures, I guess is a technical term. Police seizing assets before a person has been convicted of a crime, such as when you go in and you do a drug raid, you immediately seize all their assets, their cash, banks is frozen, whatever they have, their property is taken. And even if years later, it takes them a very long time to get their stuff back. An example, down in Virginia, there was a gas station owner who was wrongfully convicted of a crime. Eventually, they found out he didn't commit the crime. They took $50,000 to $100,000 of his money, and 8 to 10 years later, he still doesn't have his money back. Should there be reform in laws of taking property without due process?
Yes, absolutely. And I think another consideration is that what if you have a family situation and a person in the family has committed a crime? If you're taking all their assets, that might have a severe impact on the family, which, you know, could be perfectly innocent, but now, I don't know, the money is gone. I mean, that's a basic asset that people need. Or any other, maybe the vehicle. So yes, there should definitely be reform of that.
Should those drug laws be downgraded to where they're not considered to be a felony, but more of perhaps a misdemeanor, or something of a lower conviction where the assets cannot be seized?
I would certainly be open to looking at that. I mean, I am interested in any kind of legal changes that would reduce crime, reduce the incentive for crime, and reduce the profitability of it.
And then it's another one, it's a highly charged subject, is family law. Currently, most family courts are biased against men. Men have very little say when it comes to sometimes the divorce and the child custody, et cetera. And also the income. Should the laws be changed that the income of the person, let's say it's a husband and wife, if their incomes are equal or similar to each other, such that they could easily support the family by themselves, should the laws be changed that the people's circumstances are taken into consideration when a divorce settlement is made, such as, for an example, I have an acquaintance who divorced in New York. He has 49% custody, she has 51%. If he gets 50-50, then he no longer has to pay the amount of child support that he has to pay. So, and he has no say in the matter whatsoever. He cannot even petition the court. All his requests for petitioning have been rejected. She is extremely well off, as is he. Should these laws be addressed, brought into our current, these laws were made years ago when many women didn't work. Should the laws be changed to address both parties to be more fair, if there's such a thing as fair?
Yes, I would definitely say so. All the factors need to be considered. I myself had a friend who was divorced, and his ex-wife had a boyfriend, and because she wasn't married, she could still get money from her ex-husband. And of course, the boyfriend, he was making money, she was making money. I mean, she was set. And that definitely is unfair.
I have another acquaintance who cannot see his children as much as he wishes to. but she is shacking up with a deadbeat who has no job. How can this be regulated or maybe observed by whoever would do that? The courts or an individual might be assigned to each case. How can you, how should the state intervene if there's a deadbeat living off the money that the person is paying in child support, and he simultaneously has to go out and get new clothes, get food for the children while they're at his house? How should that be regulated, that those people don't get away with that stuff?
Try to answer that briefly. We're running close to the end here. We're going to try to get a question for there. We still have some time, but try to keep your questions concise. Go ahead and answer that, and then we have another question came in here, and then one over there, and we'll see how many we can keep going here.
Well, I can answer that fairly concisely by saying that I am certainly not an expert in family law, so I would need to investigate it. But I agree absolutely that the conditions for men and women have changed a lot since these laws have been put into place, and they need to be reconsidered. We need to, if women want equal rights, then they also need to pay equal prices.
All right.
Should police records be public? Currently in Pennsylvania, I think the police records are shared between departments. So if one department goes to hire an officer, those records are now being shared between departments. But should the public know who is wearing a uniform in our towns?
I don't know all that is implied by that question, so I'm not sure.
Currently, police officers' records of why they were fired, what's been going on with their life is not available to the public.
Okay. So if a police officer is fired and moves to another borough or township, should the public know where this police officer came from and why they lost their job?
Are they being paid by tax money? I mean, if you get paid by tax money, then you need to be ready to have that kind of information out there.
Okay.
I mean, you're hired, you're not in charge.
To this question, then we'll come over there. Should be a pretty simple one, although you could go into depth, I'm sure, but let's try to keep it concise. The taxpayers currently pay almost $4 billion a year to state government workers' pensions, 127,000 retired workers with new workers retiring every year. So the question from the audience here is, would you favor a state pension reform for at least new state employees entering the payroll? So should these new state employees continuing to come in, should they continue to be given pension and retirement, or should there be a change to that system?
Yes, I think there should be a change. I think I am a fan of giving people more money, fewer taxes, and letting them choose their own investment strategies.
Okay. Question over here.
Hi, Ann. I just want to go back to public education for a second. Having served on the school board for 8 years, but that was 5 years ago, public education, from what I see, is a system that is still needed. I think there's a lot that we need to do. I mean, the original bill that formed public education went back to 1949, and there's been amendments to it. But the two questions I have is, number one is, being that Pennsylvania has a high number of elderly people and retired people, would you favor a system where as people approach retirement age, that their property taxes may start to be eliminated so that they're not faced with this burden of potentially maybe losing their homes as they age or as their health changes and they're unable to pay their property taxes?
Yes, absolutely. I don't understand why we should rent from the government. And are there bills that need to be paid? Yes, but there are other ways to get the money. The way the money comes in and where it goes, how it goes out, is not clear. There should be a direct correlation as much as possible between what you're paying and who is paying for it.
And I'm sorry.
Well, and maybe along those lines, if there were more school choice, if that was facilitated, you wouldn't need some of these larger schools which are expensive to maintain.
And just a part two to public education, there's an effort going on, and there has been for some time, since monies that are going out of school districts to pay for students that are going to private schools, charter schools, it takes a large number out of their budget. It's cash out of the school district. However, I do feel that as a parent, you have the money should follow the child and not go to the school system. So would you be in favor of continuing that the monies follow the child? And also, I think, if I'm correct, right now, for those that are doing homeschooling, they receive no funding at all because it's all on them. Would you be in favor of, for some of their expenses, in allowing monies to come from the districts to help with homeschooling?
Yeah, I definitely would. I generally like the idea of the money following the child. Now, one of the issues that could arise in our areas with Amish children, they have a much, just looking at their school buildings, they have a much less expensive schooling system than the public school system. So if you give, I don't know, say $20,000 per child, you have a lot of money flowing into a community which doesn't actually need it for education. So is that going to create some kind of a conflict? Are people going to be upset about that? Are there, will there need to be some kind of revision? I think that there are a lot of different factors that need to be looked at, but I definitely think that we can trust the parents to use the money wisely. And I think that we need to let go of this concept that bigger is always better. And I definitely apply that to large schools. I benefited a lot from private education. I loved going through from public education. I loved going through the public school system in Lancaster. I'm not saying that I always got the best education. I definitely learned nothing about civics, but I had a lot of fun, and I really loved some of my teachers. I thought I had some wonderful teachers, and I loved being a public school teacher. So I definitely am sympathetic to the value of it. On the other hand, there's no question that there's a lot of excess, there is a lot of waste. It doesn't need to be as big as it is. I think that we could easily change things, and it might not look the same in every community. Different communities have different needs and different desires, but there's no reason that we have to have a one-size-fits-all, or that we have to keep it sacrosanct like it is. Let's change things. Change is a great catalyst for making a better life.
So I want to ask a follow-up on that, because the idea of the money following the child, and you mentioned homeschool student. Many parents that I know at least are concerned. They don't want government money coming into them in any form, because once the money comes, the government regulations come, and then the government's going to start to dictate how you homeschool your children. So just to push back on that and ask you, why do we need the government running education? Why not return it to private organizations, return it to the families, to the churches, the way it was prior to all this government education taking over? We talk about the property tax. It would be great to get rid of that, but are we just going to shift those taxes somewhere else to continue to fund what really is considered by many to be a socialistic system that you force people to pay to educate everybody else's kids? So why not get rid of government education and trust the people to come up with solutions to educate their children?
I think that it is a good goal. I certainly am not opposed to it. I would say that it might be much easier to implement in certain communities than in others. And there's a radical difference between, for example, inner city Philadelphia and rural Lancaster County. So if you're going to pursue that goal, how are you going to make that happen? How are you going to do it peaceably? How are you going to do it effectively? And that's quite complicated. Now, I know that I think it was back when I was in college, the governor of Wisconsin made some radical changes with regards to how people received welfare money, and there was a lot of noise about how these people were going to be freezing to death in the cold winters. But they miraculously found a way to survive, and it actually was very healthy for the state. So I'm not saying that it couldn't be a quick transition, but it would need to be thought through pretty carefully, and we need to take seriously the fallout that could come from it.
We have time for maybe one or two questions. I'm going to ask you another one if anybody else wants to get in line over there. This is question, probably weren't thinking you get this one. This is going back to the original Pennsylvania Constitution. We talk about the founding documents, we talk about the U.S. Constitution, Pennsylvania Constitution, and we talk about how great it is to return to them. And obviously there's been some changes made to the U.S. Constitution and the Pennsylvania Constitution. However, the original Pennsylvania Constitution said this: each member of the civil office, before he takes his seat, shall make and subscribe the following declarations. And this was in the Pennsylvania Constitution. I do believe in one God, the creator and governor of the universe, the rewarder of the good and the punisher of the wicked. I do acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. That was the oath in the original Pennsylvania Constitution, and that says, and no further or other religious test shall ever hereafter be required of any civil officer or magistrate in this state. So we talk about religious freedom in Pennsylvania, but the state of Pennsylvania was founded as an explicitly Christian state, as is clear in this Constitution, which it required the civil magistrates to subscribe to the Christian religion, the Old and New Testaments. The religious freedom was found within that realm of Christendom. It was found within different denominations underneath Christendom. So would you favor returning that clause back into the state constitution of Pennsylvania?
No, I wouldn't. And I would consider that not to be a separation of church and state. I think that, does that mean then that an atheist can't take part in government? Or that, a Buddhist or Muslim? I mean, we are America, we're a melting pot. And I think we need to take into consideration the fact that when that Constitution was written, there was the Christian religion and pretty much nothing else, other than whatever may have been in the native peoples. And, it's very easy to do something which is driven by what is socially acceptable at the time. And then as life changes, it no longer is socially acceptable and it needs to be revisited. If we want to reinstate that, then I think that we need to make a lot more effort to make Christianity part of our daily lives, much more so than we already do. I mean, are we going to start to require that people who come to this country have to be Christians? I mean, if we want to return to being a Christian nation, if you want that to happen, how are you going to make that happen? So I would say no, that I think that is a conflict of the separation of church and state.
Question over here.
Thank you for coming. My question would be, what is your goal then going into office? Would be some of the solutions that you're going to bring, or some of the reforms to some of the laws that are already in place that you've spoken against, saying that we need change, and we all know we need change. So what would be those kind of things that you see yourself already starting to implement if you're in office?
So I would say the easiest thing to do is simply to expose what actually is there and to tell the truth about it. And that's what I try to do on my website. That's why I have so much information and so many links, because it's not just my opinion. These are actual documents that you can go to, and you can see how I came to the opinion I have. I would say that to the degree that I can let you know exactly what's going on, I am empowering you, because that is my job. It's not me up there making decisions, and just hoping that you're going to accept them. My job as a representative of you is to show you what's going on, help you to be empowered to discuss among yourselves intelligently, knowledgeably, give your reactions. And for example, if I would go there and I would put a bill on the table that you want, and I'm told, oh, well, we're not going to work with you because you didn't come to this event and give money to this PAC, or you didn't cooperate with us on this other bill, then, or we will let you have it, but you need to make this compromise. So then my answer is, okay, fine, I'll ask my constituents, people, you can have this if you're willing to do this. What do you want me to do? To me, this is one of the ways that you avoid corruption. This is the way that you avoid cronyism. This is how you ensure that people are accountable. It's not just you doing all the work, trying to look over my shoulder, although you should do that. Sometimes it's very difficult to do and everyone's busy. So that's my job to bring that to you and empower you and help you direct me. And then I would say one of the things that I love to do is to look at what's actually there and figure out how is this inefficient and can we make it more efficient, partly because I'm always doing that in my own life. And that's partly how I survived on my own overseas. It was what I did, especially when I was working at the consulting company. And I love that. And my default position is that most things are far more complicated than they need to be. And to the degree that you can reduce government and especially reduce spending, give the money back to the people, give the responsibility back to the people, let the individual communities come together, figure out their own solutions. You know, maybe they need to kind of work with neighboring communities to cut costs. But giving the power and the knowledge and the money back to the people is, I would say, where I would start. Everything would be filtered through that view.
We have time for maybe one more question if someone wants to go over there. In the meantime, I'll ask one more. We probably have time for one more. You'd like to ask one more? If no one else, you may go over there, absolutely. I'm sorry. That's all right. Yep. So I'm going to ask one first, and then we'll come over to you, sir, in just a moment. Unfortunately, it's a question that I think needs to be asked, having to do with what's being taught in schools regarding transgenderism. Would you support legislation that outlaws any of these surgeries on minors, any of these quote-unquote sex change surgeries, hormone therapy to, you know, quote-unquote help them transition from one gender to the other as if that were possible? Would you support legislation that criminalizes that?
Yes.
And makes it illegal?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, and this is why when I say that I am really opposed to abortion, I cannot separate that from the fact that I am also extremely opposed to sexual crimes, because a sexual crime, and I would put this in that same category, is the purpose of it is to destroy the person. I mean, it's as close to pulling the trigger on a gun or stabbing someone or whatever it might be and taking their physical life as you can get. It is emotional and spiritual destruction. That is the intent of it. And to take a child, which we all know that children are vulnerable and impressionable because we remember how we were at that point in life, even if we don't have our own kids, to manipulate them, especially because a doctor can make money, someone can feel, I don't know, righteous about it. This is unacceptable. If they decide to make those choices later, well, that's up to them, but there are a lot of choices that I might have made when I was 14 that I'm very thankful I didn't have the opportunity to make.
So you mentioned being hard on crime. I want to just ask you, because one of the roles of the state legislature, these laws, is to punish evil. You know, we need laws to prevent evil. And part of those laws are the punishment. So I just want to ask you, I want to come back to the abortion issue, but I first want to ask you, you mentioned sexual crime. What should the punishment be for someone who is duly convicted of rape?
I would say life imprisonment.
Okay, what should be the punishment for abortion? If, what would we do? I mean, I know you mentioned you wouldn't support a bill that criminalizes all abortion as homicide, as the Louisiana bill. So what should the consequence for abortion be then?
I would say that you need to make a difference. Well, just like we make a difference with taking a life. You know, was there a malicious intent? Was it accidental?
Well, abortion is certainly not accidental.
Well, right, but there's the emotional state of the mother. I mean, is the mother equally responsible as the doctor who performs the abortion? I would say these two are not on the same level, especially if you are 13 or 14. I mean, a 13 or 14-year-old who is caught in a situation she doesn't want to be in is on somehow the same moral level as a 45-year-old who does this every day? No, they're not.
Let's just take the 40-year-old then.
I think
someone that goes in willingly and they freely consent to have an abortion. What should the consequence be for them and for the doctor, quote unquote, who performed that abortion?
Well, if you're going to criminalize it, then, I mean, you could not make it retroactive, of course. So I would say, again, it goes back to the people. Are the people willing to make a law.
Well, the legislator is going to make the law, so what should the punishment be for abortion?
Well, the legislator is responsible to the people. So are the people, do they want that kind of a law? I mean, it's not my job to make that law without the people's consent. I am elected by them. I am representing them. They are paying my salary. So even if I personally think that it should or shouldn't be done, if the people want it. Yeah, it's murder. We want it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's going to be a lot of different opinions, and I think this goes back to one of the questions, and we'll wrap up with this, and we'll come over here. People need to know where you stand, because people have a bunch of different opinions, and ultimately, the people don't make the laws as it's set up. We vote for our legislators who do, and so there are people who want to know, what will that punishment be, and if it should be illegal. So I'll let you maybe just address it one more time, then we'll move on over here.
Okay, so maybe I can address it from I'll give it, this is what is going through my mind as I'm trying to answer these questions. I'm trying to balance the fact that making abortion legal completely takes away the value of life. And it's telling a lie. It's saying that baby doesn't count. And it's saying that it's okay to take the life. On the other hand, I'm trying to be sensitive to people who get stuck in situations for various reasons. And for example, a girl goes to a party and she gets drunk and she gets pregnant. And is that her fault? Well, she was dumb. But it's clearly the boy's fault as well. So now she's in a situation where she has to have this baby. And is there a safety net there for her in society? And
Yeah. How is that relevant to if a child should be killed, though? We could always have situations on this could happen, that could happen, how are you going to care for them? But ultimately, does that justify the taking of a human life? Because this is how the child was conceived?
I would say no, but I would say that anybody who wants that mother to go to jail for life needs to be willing to help her with her expenses, help her give her a home if she needs it, adopt the baby. And that is one of the problems that I have found with the church is that on one hand, they want to be very pro-life, but I don't see, maybe it's the church that I went to, but I have not seen the Christian community come together to support these women to the degree that I would like.
We'll come over here for a question over here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everything you've done. Patriot for this tonight, the Lancaster Patriot. Thank you, Anne, as well. I'm shocked that this wasn't asked. That's why I'm coming up to ask. Pennsylvania has the second highest gasoline tax in the entire country. Second highest. Only California has a higher gas tax than us. And we have the 8th worst roads, and I think we're number 1 in the worst bridges. I think that's because our tax dollars aren't going to where they're supposed to go. They're getting pulled into the general fund. Would you do something about that? I don't know how, legally or by a bill or a law. That would be my question.
Well, right, and this goes back to transparency with accounting, because it seems to me that if you're taking in money for gas and it's supposed to go to the roads, then we ought to be seeing it going directly to the roads. And I don't know where it's going. I mean, from what I've heard, it's going to pay public transportation. It's going to pay state police pensions. Do the police need support? Of course, of course they do. Of course I support the police, but why is the road money going to the police? Why is the road money going to public transport? These are completely separate entities, and they should be funded separately. So that's my answer. Exactly how you get there, I'm not sure, but that's what I would do.
All right, if there are no other questions, we'll wrap up. I want to thank Anne, first of all, for your time. This is obviously not an easy thing to do, but I think many people say this is what our representatives should do, are those running for office, those who are elected, be willing to answer the questions from the people. So I think that's your obligation, but I also thank you for coming out because you could have chosen not to. So thank you for that. Again, thanks to FreePA for hosting this space, inviting us to come and moderate this. And a reminder, the primary election is on Tuesday, May 17th. So I want to thank you all for coming out. Have a good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.